Please welcome National CEO, Dan Springer.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first in our series of JNF Connect webinars. As Gabby mentioned, I'm Dan Springer, and I hope you and all your families are healthy, staying healthy, and coping with these challenging times. The last time the world went through a global pandemic, it was over 100 years ago, and JNF was only 17 years old. Yet throughout times of peace, war, and pandemic, JNF has continued to build communities, plant forests, create reservoirs, and lay the infrastructure for our Jewish homeland. That work continues today with a particular focus on Israel's periphery, particularly the Negev region. And we've seen the fruits of those efforts over the last couple of months, where desert agriculture in Israel's south is feeding the rest of the country, a country closed down, locked down behind closed borders like the rest of the world, and helping Israel get through this crisis. Our panelists tonight will share with us how they're leading their businesses through the crisis. And it's with great pleasure that I welcome back Cliff Rosenberg as our moderator. Cliff had previously moderated some of our events, our physical events, and it's great to welcome Cliff back for our first online event. Cliff sits on the board of a number of ASX-listed companies. He also was previously the MD for the Asia, Australia, and New Zealand region for LinkedIn, and prior to that, MD of Yahoo for Australia and NZ. It's also a great pleasure to welcome back Adina Jacobs, who was a former panelist on one of our business forums. Adina, in 1998, co-founded STM Products. It's a company that produces accessories for many of our much-loved technical devices, iPhone, iPad, etc. And the company has really grown internationally over the last 2 decades to over 30 countries. In addition to that, Adina, in 2016, co-founded a women's mentoring network called Mentor Walks, and that's expanded around the country. And finally, a very warm welcome to Adir Schiffman. Adir is executive chairman of actually a company that my youngest son, Ben, would very much appreciate, being into sport, which is an athlete analytics company, and in fact, they are a global leader in providing that service. Adir has also founded and sold over a dozen other companies in the last decade, and has a lot of expertise going offshore, in particularly with respect to SaaS, B2B, and enterprise businesses. He also happens to be a medical practitioner on the side. Please note that you have a chat button on your screen on the side there, and feel free to lob in questions throughout the evening. And hopefully most of your questions will be picked up by one of the panelists before the evening is over. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy this evening, and please give a very warm, if virtual, welcome to our panelists this evening. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Dan, and appreciate the warm introduction. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the session tonight. Really pleased that you're all joining us. As Dan said, we're definitely living through very, very challenging times. And I guess just a few months ago, none of us could have predicted what we're currently going through. Before we start, I obviously hope that first and foremost, you and your families are all keeping healthy and are safe. It's the most important thing, obviously, at a time like this. And of course, an extended thanks for your ongoing support of all the great work that JNF are doing for our community. So thanks, everyone. I'm pretty sure that this year will be remembered as the year in which a global health crisis pretty much evolved into a financial crisis, the likes of which most of us have never seen before, and hopefully we'll never see this again. We've all been impacted in one way or another, both at work and at home. And I think that's the difference between this crisis and any other, is the fact that it's both a work and home thing. And with us all now working out of home, the whole concept of work-life balance has certainly taken on an entirely new meaning for all of us as well. We're obviously very fortunate tonight to have two highly successful and well-known entrepreneurs with us for the event. And both Adina and Adir will be sharing their experiences and insights with us as to how they've been affected by the global crisis. More importantly, they'll share how they've adapted and in some cases as well pivoted to the challenge. All three of us are involved in a number of sectors and companies, so we can also share some thoughts on emerging trends that we're seeing and that might be of interest to all of you as well. We'll definitely leave time for questions. So as Dan just said, please do send them in along the way and we'll try our best to answer them all. We can't promise to answer any questions relating to where the virus actually started. And I think forever and a day, that will be a question no one will ever really truly know the answer to. But any other questions, we're happy to try and accommodate. So it's a great opportunity as well to get to know Adina and Adir beyond what is on their LinkedIn profiles. So to begin with, I've asked them to each talk about something interesting about themselves, so you get to know them a bit, and then to take us through how they've been impacted by the crisis, their coping strategies, tactics that they are implementing. It was quite hard to work out whether it's Adina or Adir to go first, and it turns out they both start with ADI, so it was quite hard to do the alphabetical in order who should go first thing. But I think if we can kick off with Adina, and then I'll hand over to Adir as well, and then we'll get the conversation going. So with that, Adina, if I can hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I just realized that I didn't turn my microphone on, so nobody heard anything I was saying. Okay, what I did say was, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to Dan for the introduction as well, and thanks to JNF for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be invited to be involved in something like this, so it's great to be here. So as Dan was saying, I have two businesses. One is called STM Brands. It's a brand that my business partner and I started 23 years ago. We make accessories for tech devices. So we make phone cases and laptop bags and iPad cases. And our products are mainly, well, they're all made in Asia, and then they're distributed around the world in 30 different countries. We do a lot of work in the education market, so we sell to schools and universities and to the computer resellers that sell into those markets. And we also sell in places like JB Hi-Fi and the Apple retail stores and other resellers like that. And then we do some work in the government space as well. So it's interesting when a big economic event happens, because you really get to see which sectors of the market are affected, and we're very fortunate that we cross a number of different sectors. So where you see a dip in retail, because there's such a big focus on work from home and school from home at the moment, we're seeing an increase in sales in those areas. And of course, because we produce our product in China, we saw the impacts of COVID very early on, because a lot of our manufacturing facilities were shut down and we weren't sure when they were going to open again. And then as they came out of it and started to ramp up production again, then the rest of the world started to be impacted by it. And so we're getting it across, like we're getting the curve of COVID coming and hitting the business at different times. But I think because of the way we operate, we have an office in Australia and then we have another office in San Diego. And we also have distributors and salespeople around the world. We're very familiar with working remotely. And so that move to work from home or work with the work from out of office has been quite an easy one for us. We're already geared to work out of the office. We're geared to work from different locations. We're geared to working across different time zones. And so we already had a lot of the tools set up, ready to go for that kind of thing. So for us, it's really been about doubling down and making sure that all of our relationships are strong, that all the people who work with us are okay, and that they are comfortable and confident that they can do what they need to do from where they are, and making sure that everybody knows that we're here for them. I mean, it's a 23-year-old business. We've been through the global financial crisis. We went through post 9/11. We've been around for a lot of dips and ups and downs in the economy, and we're a strong business with a good head on our shoulders. And so for us, it's really been about just being smart about how and where we spend money, and about understanding what we need to do to stick this out for the long haul and be there for our customers and be there for the people who work with us.
Interesting. And Adina, you mentioned the manufacturing in China. Can you say more about that and what your thoughts are going forward regarding China factories opening up again, or the speed at which they're coming online again?
So what happened in China was that the lockdown started to happen during the Chinese New Year holiday. So we always account for our factories being offline for usually around the month of February. And the coronavirus and the news around it started to come to light in the early part of February, towards the middle of February. And that's when we understood that the factories were not going to come back online towards the end of February. So we always planned to have stock that sees us through that period of time anyway. So we were okay in the beginning, and then we were just smart around how we moved our product from warehouse to warehouse. And we didn't see a big period of time where we didn't have product. I mean, we always have ups and downs depending on demand, and there's a huge demand for certain products at the moment. But in terms of the manufacturing in China and the ability to get product out of China, it was scary because we didn't know what was going to happen, but they were very responsible and responsive, and they were very communicative. And we're good. We've got a fantastic relationship with all our manufacturing partners, and we really, they over-communicated with us, and that allowed us to give confidence to our customers as well. And all of the factories that we work with now are fully operational. The main challenge is getting the stock out of the country, because a lot of freight that goes on airplanes goes on passenger planes. And when there are less passenger planes, it's harder to get space to get your product out. But we're working around that as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good to hear. I've spoken to a lot of people who've told me that the global supply chains have really been quite damaged, and they're really questioning whether or not they're going to be using manufacturers out of Asia or anywhere else in the future again. We've
been very fortunate with that. It was tricky, but we've got great relationships, and we've been able to navigate through that.
Awesome. Great. There might be some more questions coming your way, I'm sure, from the audience on that front. So thank you for that. Derek, can we hand over to you at this point? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, Cliff, hi, Dina, and hello to everyone who I can't see. And apologies, I was saying before, the most excited participant tonight is my fan on my laptop. So if there's a slight noise there, welcome to technology. So I thought I would start off by telling you about my cap, because I don't often I wear a cap. It's unusual for me. And apart from the hair catastrophe that I'm experiencing with COVID-19, I thought I'd wear it because, so this cap is like the San Diego Chargers, an American football team. And I got this cap when I went down there with Catapult in 2012, and it was a big training facility and a big stadium and lots of money, and it all felt very, very permanent and very established. And then in 2017, they moved to Los Angeles, and there was no more San Diego Chargers, it was the Los Angeles Chargers. And so I've worn this cap quite a bit in the last 6 weeks as a personal reminder that things that feel like they're permanent and they're going to go on forever can tend to pass pretty quickly, and they become a distant memory in the past. So that is 75% of the reason that I'm wearing a cap, this cap. I guess let me tell you a little bit about what I felt through a couple of the exposures in businesses that I've had with COVID-19. So Catapult is probably the world's biggest company in the sports technology sector. We're most well known as the company that provides the wearable technology to the NRL and to the AFL and ARU, et cetera, but there's kind of a broader business than that. It's a publicly listed company on the ASX. And that's an interesting business in terms of COVID-19, because generally it's a subscription software business, and it has long dated subscriptions. And it means that, number one, pro sport is a very resilient industry overall. And even in times where now there's a hiatus, obviously, in pro sports, because of the nature of the long dated contracts, it means we're somewhat insulated from a lot of the turmoil that's going on. The biggest sport for us is American football. That doesn't start until August or September anyway. So, on that front, I would say, I went through a lot of pain as a CEO in 2009, 8, 9, 10 during the global financial crisis. And I think that made me forever basically, I'm a paranoid optimist. So I think that things are going to turn out okay. But in the short term, I think that all of the roof tiles are going to come down on my head. And so I tend to try and take steps relatively early to protect against catastrophic outcomes. And I think with all of the businesses that I'm involved with, Catapult, another business, Sleeping Duck, which is a mattresses business, we took steps early to assess what was going on. As it happens, that business is very strong during COVID-19 and has seen an uptick. But I think really the number one thing for me is learning the lessons of the terrible decisions that I made during the financial crisis, not reacting fast enough, thinking that it was all going to pass very quickly, and trying not to replicate those bad decisions during COVID-19.
You note there of something that I'd like to talk a bit more about, if you don't mind, is you mentioned Sleeping Duck, which is a mattress manufacturer as well, and quite interesting that you're actually seeing an uptick in sales on that specific front. I think it's testament to the fact that not every business is necessarily suffering right now. There's certain businesses in certain sectors that are actually doing better than they were doing pre-COVID. So I do think there's an entire generation that's now coming online and fast tracking onto e-commerce that might not have done so previously. So there's no doubt that the digitization has increased. Any thoughts on that front about the move towards e-commerce, the pace at which things are going from offline to online for retailers specifically?
I mean, I'm happy to answer that in the context of Sleeping Duck. So that's a business. I mean, the founders of that business, I got involved a couple of years ago, and the business, frankly, was not in good shape at all. But the founders are always reluctant to be too upbeat in this time because they don't want to be seen as, you know, like Jerry Harvey was not the most popular human being after his remarks. And these are two very modest founders. But look, what I think is happening is that there's a natural transition online that's occurring anyway. I mean, you're really familiar with it across the Afterpay experience that you've had. And I think that this period has dramatically accelerated that. And it's pretty obvious to me that businesses like Kogan or like Catch, which is Wesfarmers now, would see a strong uptick. I wasn't sure if mattresses would see an uptick. Like, you know, I told you my natural disposition was prepare for the worst. You know, we've seen a really strong uptick. I could give you 100 rationalizations of why we've had that uptick. Like, they'd probably all just be made up. Like, who knows? I can rationalize it retrospectively. But I think what has happened is that the migration to online has accelerated, because in the case of mattresses, people that would have walked into a Snooze or a 40 Winks, they're not walking into those stores now. They're purchasing online. And obviously they can return the mattress if they don't like it. And so I don't think that this level of online purchasing will persist at the end of the crisis, but I think that it will be at a higher level than it was previously, and it will accelerate the migration. And my personal view in that particular sector, my kids are 13 and 10, and I will be shocked if either of them ever walks into a mattress store to buy a mattress. I think, you know, those days are over. So that's my take on what's happening with this.
Yeah, so and I totally agree with you. I think anyone who was a cautious online shopper before, or was restricted to only certain items online, like maybe clothing, has now expanded their repertoire of things that they prepared to buy online, whether it's mattresses or anything else. And I think that will be one of the trends we'll see out of this, is people being a lot more accepting of buying things that they might not have bought previously online. Things like gym equipment, etc., probably never saw massive sales spikes before online. Whereas if you go online right now, you can't buy gym equipment for the home for the love of anything. It's just not available. So people have definitely come on stream very quickly.
Or dog food. So I know that some people selling dog food online, which is, I mean, you know, with apologies to anyone who's invested in that industry, but that's not an easy gig, right? Like low value product. But I know that they've had this enormous spike and they're virtually out of stock. Yeah. So definitely that kind of thing is happening as well.
Yeah.
I think what's happening as well is because people are spending so much time at home, they're really hunkering down and making sure that their homes are as comfortable as they can be. And if their income hasn't been impacted, then they've got the time to shop and the money to be able to spend. And so they're doing things like upgrading their mattress or buying other things. I know we're doing it a bit in our home as well. Like, we're looking around and seeing what needs to be fixed. What can we do to make our stay at home more comfortable? And we've bought the gym equipment and we bought the new Doonas, and we're doing all that kind of thing. So I completely understand why the mattresses have gone up.
Yeah. And I think a lot of online retailers were expecting quite a dip in sales, given unemployment's gone up and people are kind of suffering in many ways. A lot of sectors which are really struggling right now. But I think a lot of the government incentives have started kicking in, and it's kind of actually helped bolster sales as well, if you watch all the trends.
I mean, my guess is if people that have not lost their jobs So obviously there's this group of people, unfortunately less educated people, often working in hospitality or retail roles. I think that one of the challenges with COVID-19 seems to me to be likely to dramatically exacerbate the wealth gap. And that probably is true of education as well. But the people that haven't lost their jobs, objectively, they would be spending significantly less money on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah.
And so I think that that has been an unexpected outcome for a lot of people. And it's why you read articles about bottle shops selling much more expensive alcohol to people that traditionally had bought cheaper alcohol.
Yeah.
I think people have more discretionary income if they haven't lost their jobs.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but my biggest expense these days is food. If I have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I've done all the takeaways. It seems to be the biggest expense every day. So guys, why don't we shift topics a little bit and look at some of the trends that you're both seeing out there that might be interesting to the audience, things that are quite insightful, things like the work at home phenomena, etc. But let's just pick on a couple of key trends and explore those further. Adina, do you mind kicking off on that front? Adina, you're on mute.
I'm getting really good at this, aren't I? I'll get there eventually. So obviously we're seeing the rise of everyone being able to do pretty much everything from home. So everything from your yoga class to your gym class to Yom HaShoah ceremonies in the last few days. There's so many things that are happening online. And so anything that can facilitate that, it's the webcams, it's the good microphones, it's the good headphones, it's all of that, all of those things. And we see that in our customers, like JB Hi-Fi is selling out of all of that kind of product. And if you go in and try and find that kind of thing, you can't buy it. People can't buy desks, they can't buy chairs. So a lot of these companies, like I heard a story of a company called Stage Kings that was making very high-end staging equipment for music festivals and that kind of thing. They are now, they're out of business, not out of business, but they don't have any business in that show business side of things. So they're now making desks, like a desk that you can click together in 3 easy steps. And people are buying them by the hundreds because they can't get desks from anywhere. And they're really impressed with the way that a business that was struggling has now pivoted and provided a product that people really need. In my other business, which is a not-for-profit called Mentor Walks, I mean, we're supposed to be walking at Mentor Walks. It's it's an event where people get together and they walk in groups of 2 or 3 and there's a mentor and mentees and they have a conversation. We can't do that at the moment. So we've had to be really creative in the way that we bring the support to our community. So we're now doing online events as well. And it's, in the last couple of weeks, we've had to figure out a way to simulate that experience of being together without actually being in the same room. And you're seeing that across so many different community type activities. And I hope that that's something that's going to persist. Obviously, when people can come and sit down and be face to face again, that would be amazing. But there are so many people that can't actually do that are now connected in because they don't have this barrier of actually having to be in the same room or the same space. So I hope that strong community mindedness is a trend that really continues, and that inclusive nature of being able to have so many more people involved from so many different areas, that continues after this.
Yeah. I read an interesting statistic today that Zoom reported that their user numbers since the beginning of April have gone up 50%, which is an amazing, you'd think of the hundreds of millions of people using Zoom, and to have a 50% increase in literally the last few weeks.
Yeah.
It's really a testament to the way people are coming online and using online video.
Yeah.
My gut feel one of the trends we're going to see is businesses in future will be a lot more accepting of people working out of home and using things like Zoom to talk to each other and collaborate. And my gut feel is we'll cut down a lot of business travel as well, because people won't see the need to travel around the globe as much to have face-to-face meetings, because these things work perfectly well, and people you can get 90% of the conversation done over Zoom.
You can, and people have figured out ways to actually really engage and interact with each other. I mean, it's in the past, I think, because, culture is such an important part of businesses, and the way that people interact with each other and the way that they understand each other is so important. And in the past, the way that you do that is by being face to face. But when you don't have a choice and you have to find ways to engage over Zoom, all of a sudden you realize that it's important to be together, but it's not vital. There are other ways of doing things. And so I think we're going to see a lot of flexibility around exactly like you said, around business travel. It'll still happen, but I think you may not jump on a plane, for a 2-day trip. You may figure that you can work it out like this rather than, taking the effort and time to actually go somewhere and get something done.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I think the human species is extremely adaptable, which we're all seeing happening right now. Adair, maybe some of your thoughts on trends that you're seeing in your industry?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Adina. Like any business that can do something that is in some way remote and can facilitate remote activity, those businesses are flying. And I think the Stage King story is an interesting story. Like the corollary of that, I would say, as one caveat, is that's a great story because it's one company that's managed to pull a rabbit out of a hat. But the majority of companies, there's just nightmares coming out of hats, not rabbits, right? And so, I think that's the truth of this situation, is that a huge number of businesses are in dire straits with this situation. And so I would just make that point, like the happy stories are the good stories, but I think the common stories are how in the hell do we get through this time without running out of money or firing all of our staff? Yeah. I mean, on a happier note, so two startups that I'm involved with have done interesting things. So one of them they're called LoopLearn. They do access control for schools. So they've got AI, and when you walk in, a lot of Jewish schools use them. When you walk in and out, it can identify who the tradespeople are or who whatever is, and who's in your school and where they are. Now, obviously, no one is in school very much at the moment at all, so that's not good for their sales, especially a small startup. And so they've managed I'm quite astonished that they've managed to do it, but they've managed to pivot to aged care and to start deploying this stuff through aged care because the Royal Commission called for a lot of improvement in security and accountability in aged care. And so, they told me that was their intention. I thought, good on them, but astonishingly, they've pulled it off and early days, but I thought that was innovative. And the other thing is so there's another business I'm involved in called Quali, and they are a market research platform, an online market research platform for qualitative research. And enterprises have frozen their budgets, basically, as a general rule. And in fact, I can tell you a story of one business I'm involved in that had an approved purchase order and invoice, and it was scheduled to be paid, and payment was executed by a university. And the payment didn't go through because the CFO had put a stop on all payments. So I thought, when a university in Australia, big university in Australia, is your counterparty risk of an invoice, that is not a good sign. But this company, Quali, they basically have created a whole heap of modules that instead of getting video feedback and ranking it from customers for corporates, are actually focused on employees at home and getting information like, how are you managing your mental health effectively? What are your hacks for physical conditioning? What do you think the main problems our customers are facing right now are, and how should we solve them? So I think, the smart businesses are trying to pivot. It's hard enough to get your primary business right, let alone nailing a pivot. But, like if they can pull it off, all credit to them. I think the most important thing from my point of view is, whilst trying that, ensuring that the core business survives through COVID-19 so that that business can continue at the end of this. But I agree with the comments that both of you have made. I mean, look, I think the cruise industry, who is booking a cruise in the next 6 months after those floating incubators
or even longer,
right? So, and I pity that because, these are all industries. Like when people talk about essential jobs, my view is if you do a job and it's how you eat, that's an essential job. Yeah. And so, I really feel sorry for these industries, but I think travel and tourism will have long-term damage as a consequence of COVID-19 is my take on it.
There's no doubt about that. And the word pivot is used so much lately as companies are seeing the need to pivot quickly from models that might have worked a few weeks ago, and now they have to do things quite differently. A good friend of mine once said to me, and you repeated to me the other day, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And it's actually true, is you've got to actually look at the silver lining wherever possible and try and create opportunities out of all the chaos right now. But there's always a way out of things, hopefully.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people are rushing to kind of do whatever they can and throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And they're probably spending money that they can't afford to doing that. Things like a lot of, there was a shortage of hand sanitizer and face masks and gloves. And so all of a sudden, all these businesses are importers of that. But that's a very short-term thing. It might bring them some cash to get them to the next stage. But it's not going to be the thing that their business becomes, because there's not going to be a forever shortage of hand sanitizer in Australia. Yeah. So it'll be very interesting to see, this very short-term stage of like, what's the urgency around getting together money so that you can keep going, and then what's next for them? What are they going to do coming out of this?
Yeah.
On the flip side, I feel most sorry for the millennials, because on the plus side, they get afterpay, so that's good, right? But on the downside, they can't afford property, and now we're going to be paying back another $200 billion of cost. Yeah. So I think maybe I get another 20 years of working life, and that's not my problem anymore. But I think millennials, their life is not getting easier as a consequence of this. I think ultimately they'll wear a lot of the burden of this. Yeah. I think a lot of the people that have lost jobs are millennials, that have been furloughed or are on job seeker or JobKeeper even. And I think that there are still a lot of this debt is going to fall to them in the long term. Is my guess.
And one of my fears would be, I think the unemployment trend is going to continue for a while, because a lot of companies have made redundancies or retrenchments and try to cut costs wherever they can on the staffing side. But my fear is companies are now also seeing the efficiencies and effectiveness kicking in from people working out of home. And I don't think they're going to rehire to the same levels that they had pre-coronavirus. So I think the trend, unfortunately, for unemployment is going to be on the uptick for a while longer, which is obviously not great for all of us. And about the millennials, they're going to bear a lot of this.
Well, I think a heap of those store closures. I mean, what I hear from directors of publicly listed retailers is there were a heap of marginal stores for a very long time, because of the degradation of Main Street retail. And Adina, probably you felt like Main Street versus online, like it's a long-term trend. And I think a lot of these retailers are saying, probably 25% of our stores are being hit by COVID-19, but there's this other 10 or 15%. God, we've wanted to shut them for a long time. And now we can finally manage our leases, get the hell out of these leases. And so they're never going to reopen. And so I think there definitely will be an overall drop in the overall number of retail staff in Australia.
There's no doubt about it. I think shopping centres, offline retail, definitely difficult sectors to be in.
It was difficult before, and now this has been a reason for people to be able to just clean up and move on to the next thing.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. I am cognizant of time, and I do want to try and take some questions from everyone dialing in. Before we do so, we have talked a little bit about public companies' reaction, and I know we had discussed that previously as well before we were preparing for tonight. I thought I might just give a bit of a view to everyone dialing in on how public companies are reacting to everything and how the market's been perceiving everything right now. So just a few words, and then we'll open up to Q&A from the floor. I think in terms of how public boards and private boards are responding, and I'm fortunate in that I sit across a few of them across various different sectors. Just some thoughts. I think it's clear, it's easy to say, but I think it's quite clear that every company is unique, and some have been significantly more impacted than others. So like we've just spoken about, if you're in hospitality, restaurant industry, travel, offline retail, for example, it's very, very tough right now, and boards are really struggling, and so are CEOs and so are exec teams, etc. And then you get almost on the other end of it, you get those in the digital space, anyone to do with e-commerce, if you're in Amazon or if you're in video conferencing, such as Zoom, which we talked about, or entertainment streaming. Netflix is showing record numbers. You're almost getting the complete flip side of things, and you're seeing those companies actually going through a real uptick right now. So you've almost got like these two things going along at the same time, where some companies are really struggling and others are seeing record numbers. So there's no doubt about it, depending on which board meeting you're attending in any one day, you're kind of seeing very different levels of thinking going on. I think we're probably in the second phase of response. So initially when it happened, and I'm talking from a board point of view and seeing how companies were reacting. I think when the crisis first came along, which is just a few weeks ago, there was definitely a sense of panic. The first thought in everyone's mind was, oh my goodness, is everyone healthy? Is everyone safe? Is everyone okay? And the big emphasis up front was on the well-being and the health of staff and employees. And that was the first question boards were asking for the first few weeks. It was all about health and well-being. I think the other big emphasis in the beginning was on the well-being of the business, obviously, with a very strong emphasis on cost control and a big emphasis on liquidity to ensure the business could get through this crisis. So those were the two big topics and remain two big topics for boards. But I think as time ticks on, there's less questions about health and well-being and more about the health and well-being and the pivoting of business models. I think the board's feelings generally is that companies are dealing well with the health crisis and are dealing pretty well with the work at home phenomena, which wasn't the case when we started. So I think companies have gone through pretty significant cost reductions, especially on the people side, which we've talked a bit about, but there's no doubt unemployment is spiking. A lot of boards have taken down CEO fees and salaries. There's going to be very few short-term incentives being paid this year, and a lot of boards themselves are seeing cost reductions on board fees as well. So it's kind of board showing the teams that they're not alone and they're bearing a bit of the brunt as well. I think we talked about the fact that companies are learning how to be a lot more efficient and effective with a reduced number of staff. I think that's going to continue as a trend, as we talked about. I think anyone in the office space sector is going to feel the impact for a long time to come, as companies realize they may not necessarily need the big offices that they had before. And then I was kind of thinking, what's the most asked question lately? The most asked question lately really is when and if things might return to normal, and what might it look like? And obviously, when will the lockdown ease and which industries will open up first? Those tend to be a lot of the discussions going on right now. The answer to this is there's no easy answer. I think all three of us would say that it's unlikely there will be a point in time where everything just goes back to normal. I think there'll be a new normal, and I think there'll be a gradual transition to things being switched back on. And I think it's fair to say that that businesses that got switched off first will probably get switched on last. So a good example there might be international travel. I think that's going to come back online as one of the last businesses. And the reason being is it doesn't matter what the government mandates. I think it's to do with trust. Is if people don't feel safe and they don't trust the fact that everything's clean and that the health issues are under control, they're not going to want to get back into crowded aeroplanes or restaurants, unfortunately, or sports venues, unfortunately. So people are going to want to feel like they're living in a world that's safe to move around. So that's just generally some high-level thoughts on how we're seeing things from a public company point of view and some of the trends we're seeing emerging out there as well. Adina, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to what I said. Otherwise, we can open it up to questions at this point.
Yeah, I've got something quick to say. I think what I've really loved about, I mean, it's such an interesting time and it's, you know, shocking in so many ways, but what I've really loved about it is seeing how communities have really come together to support each other. And, you know, in some instances early on, people were galvanized to help and there was no one to help yet. And they were just waiting there helping because they were so giving and so generous of their time and their energy. And it took a while for people to actually be able to accept the help or realize that they needed the help. And I hope that this community mindedness and this compassion for other people stays around and it doesn't just disappear and people don't just disappear back into their own lives and their own worlds again. I hope that really sticks around and that people's understanding of each other and I mean, even now, you know, you do a Zoom meeting and someone's child runs through or whatever. Like before, you were doing those meetings in an office and people didn't have an understanding of what other people were dealing with. Now you really know what's going on in other people's lives and you're more understanding and more generous with your expectations. And I hope that continues because I think that that's a really, it's a kindness that's come out in people that wasn't necessarily there before or wasn't as obvious before. And I hope that that's something that stays.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you're definitely seeing a better sense of community spirit around it. You're seeing families coming together much more so than maybe previously when everyone's eating together now 3 times a day. On the flip side, unfortunately, we're seeing increasing levels of xenophobia as well, where we're hearing on the news every day a lot of what are pretty much racist attacks on other communities.
Yeah.
So kind of getting both sides of the argument as communities are coming closer together, but actually in some ways also pulling apart depending on how things are looked at.
But you know, there are 25 million people in Australia, and so like there are some maniacs that are here and who don't like people that look different for probably their own personal issues that are going on. And so I did see that there were these comments. I try to stay off social media. It's not LinkedIn. I do LinkedIn, but other than that, it's not great for my mental health, frankly. But I did see some comments even on LinkedIn where people were talking about some racist attacks, which were appalling, on a couple of Chinese students in Melbourne. And there were some comments about, Australia is better than this. And the truth is, like, actually, Australia is much better than that. It's not a racist country in any way by global standards. And, maybe those people are not better than that. Hopefully they are too. It's the poor decision making. But I think on the whole, I think Daniel's spot on. Like, there's a level of niceness that is pervading society now. Also, I never get to spend enough time with friends, so it's like a level playing field for me now because nobody gets to spend enough time with friends. So, but definitely, I think that that people are telling each other, stay well. And I'm trying, but it's nice that you care now if I stay well. So.
And when people say, how
agree.
are you? They actually want to know, like,
no,
how are you?
Agree. I completely agree with that. It's great. It will be fun. I'm generally very positively predisposed to human beings. I'm not super cynical about it. And hopefully there will be a bit of a tail to this. I think there probably will be. I mean, we're living through history here in a very obvious way. People will be talking about this in 60, 70, 80 years' time, provided there's no, COVID Mark II that comes around in the next year or two. I think it feels very much to me like we're living through a historic moment.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. I think we'll be telling our grandchildren about 2020 one day. There's no doubt about it. Guys, I'm cognizant of time, and I do want to give the audience a chance. Gabby, why don't you I know we almost on 8:45. Why don't you let us know if there's any questions coming in, and we're happy to answer whatever they might be.
With pleasure. Hi, and good evening, everyone. It's Gabby from the JNF offices. We have had a beautiful attendance this evening and really lovely messages of both support and concurring with our panelists, who we're enormously grateful for your time. I will run through a few because there are a couple that jumped off the chat board, and I guess it could go to either Adir or Adina. But one of the questions was, do you see a shift moving away from Australia's reliance on China? I guess particularly, I know Adina's, that might relate a lot to STM for you.
So yeah, I'm happy to start off with this one. It's not easy to shift your manufacturing from one country to another. First of all, the majority of the raw materials come from either China or countries surrounding China. All of the manufacturing capabilities are really centered around that region, and all of the capabilities as well. So the people who know what they're doing in that space. And to establish the type of manufacturing that we do, I mean, we're not making cars or construction equipment or anything like that, but still in the type of product that we make, the equipment, the materials and the know-how doesn't exist outside of the Asian countries. We have looked into it. We looked into it when the tariffs from China importing into the US skyrocketed back last year. We looked into how to shift production to different countries. We've had some success at doing that. But for the most part, the core products that we make live and breathe in China at this point. And the truth is, I have not had a negative experience working in China and with our manufacturers. Unless it's a political issue like this tariff scenario, I wouldn't look to move away from manufacturing in China. We have wonderful partners there. We have mutual respect. We have a great working relationship and a great personal relationship. And I think it's never good to have all your eggs in one basket, but I wouldn't look to move away from Asia just because of this scenario.
So I completely agree that the tariffs already caused big issues. So, you know, for sleeping duck, like a chunk of our materials come from Australia. Actually, there's a lot of work that's done on it in China and brought back to Australia. Definitely, they're already trying to look to Malaysia when there were these tariffs put in. The main problem with tariffs is probably your experience as well, is it's not exporting into the US that's the problem. It's that all of these factories are underwritten by US orders. And so it completely changes the cost base of these factories to those US orders. I mean, my view on Australia's broader relationship with China is, I think, so essential industry should be brought back to Australia. I think that's everyone's kind of woken up to that. So maybe we should make some masks and etc. here. But I think also the bigger challenge is the reverse direction with China. I mean, almost all of our export dollars are generated from Chinese trade. And I think most people that talk about the relationship with China are more concerned about the 30 to 40% of export dollars that are coming from China in terms of rocks, coal, education, etc., than manufacturing in China. I largely agree with Adina. Like, I think whether it's China, Vietnam, Thailand, like there is expertise in raw materials. You can't make mattresses in Australia. It's very hard because you can't get springs because there's no automotive industry and all the springs were for car seats. So this is what happens with the knock-on effects of losing industry. So I think we largely align, but I do worry about the huge export percentage that goes to China more than the imports.
Okay, another question from Danielle. Do you think companies will measure productivity differently than they did before Corona going forward?
I think companies that measure productivity would already be a huge step up for most companies. You know, I think this will change in terms of measuring productivity. So there was a huge amount of cynicism about work from home before Corona. It was like not work from home, I think, was the general attitude towards it. And I think what's become obvious is that people are serious and they can work from home. And sometimes the reverse problem, in fact, occurs where there's a bleeding of work into every other aspect of their life and they work through weekends as well. So I think the way that people look at productivity will change. I think governments that talk about, you know, a new focus on gross national happiness and we'll all be Bhutan, like it is a great theory. And I think that there's much more to life than economic productivity and GDP. But I also think that people like nice things and Western countries will find it difficult to do that, is my view on that.
Okay, and Cliff, there was a question from Benji who asked, broadly, do you think the market has bottomed out or are we predicting further falls before the recovery kind of starts to climb up the hill?
Is he looking for stock tips?
Benji can jump on the chat and let us know.
Work out why the question was directed at me.
Well, whoever feels qualified to respond to Benji, but he was...
I definitely don't.
Has the market bottomed out? I mean, it's another hour's worth of discussion at least. I mean, the market's pretty much not running in sync with the real crisis, basically due to government support initiatives. So the stimulus packages initiated by governments around the world has kind of propped up the stock market almost artificially so it's not in sync with unemployment levels or the financial crisis being experienced by companies. So it's kind of hard because it all depends. The stock market's really going to be swayed by how much further the government's prepared to continue funding things. But I think we've seen with the likes of Virgin, the government's not prepared to fund everything. So certain companies are going to go under, unfortunately. And the government hasn't got unlimited pockets. I mean, at some point, the government just can't afford to continue funding things. I'm not even going to try on a call like this with 83 people. I'm not even going to try and predict stock market trends, though. So I'll give that question on this. Thank you.
You could say, Cliff, anyone that wants to buy cheap stock should wait for the tsunami of discounted rights issues and recaps that is going to come through the market at some point in the next few months, is my guess.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it sector by sector. I mean, there's certain sectors like tourism, which obviously are, you know, or travel. You can look at the likes of airlines or cruise liners that we referred to earlier. Obviously, in the short term, those stocks are not going to be doing very well. But if you want to be bullish on them, it's just a matter of trying to predict at what point in time do they come back on stream. And if you can get that right, you'll be a billionaire. But who knows when they come back on stream? That's the million-dollar question.
It is. I've just got a couple more questions before we'll finish up. I guess to Adira or Adina, both relevant. What measures have you put in place due to the current climate and Corona that you feel has actually benefited the business? So what are the things that you're likely to retain that you weren't doing as business as usual a month ago?
It's a good question. I mean, like I said before, we've been geared to work remotely for a long time, even though we don't necessarily always, but we can. And so I think we'll continue. I mean, we would love to get people back in as soon as it's safe to do so, because we just like being together and working together in the same space. But one of the things that I've personally made more of an effort to do is to touch base with more people within the business on a more regular basis, not about work. So just to check in with them to see, what have they been doing on the weekend? What have their kids been doing? How's their kids' schoolwork going? Did they get a puppy? Like, just trying to engage with people on a personal level and I always used to kind of check in with people, but I didn't make enough time for that kind of thing. And I feel like that's something that I will continue going forward.
It's been your whole answer trying to think of the best thing that I could possibly conceive that has come out of coronavirus. So I came up with a blank. I think the one positive is that bigger organizations that I'm involved in have been forced to think a little bit more like smaller organizations in terms of nimbleness and agility and trying new things in this time. So that would be great to retain. To be frank, I'm not sure that that's capable of being retained when your core business is actually growing strongly. So, I'll be happy when Corona is over, frankly.
Yeah, and I would say I think we'd all be happy when it's over. On the plus side, I think employee well-being initiatives from companies have actually been increased quite significantly. And I think there's a lot more caring going on in terms of how people are feeling. And I've actually had one or two sort of lower level employees in some companies saying they've never felt as in touch as they are right now with the CEO and the exec team, because the really good CEOs are checking in much more often on Zoom with a much wider audience. And that's the beauty of these kind of calls is you can check in with 100 people quite easily as long as people dial in at the right time. But for a lot of the younger or more junior staff, it's a great chance for them to interface with the CEO who a lot of them never really had a chance to speak with before.
Yes, and I mean, I can comment just from JNF's perspective. The national cohesion, which we were already really close and strong, but this real physical, rather than just a phone call, every other day to catch up with our counterparts, this real face-to-face in your home, I think it's created a beautiful sense of team and camaraderie that while it existed, it's really magnified in this forum, which is a really lovely output and I think not-for-profit as well. And I can see Jaron commented on the chat, and I agree. He's had a long career in not-for-profit. It's been an interesting time, and we've noticed this beautiful outpouring of support. Really, when there is that question around people's personal financial situation and whether they're buying a product or making a donation, I think we've been really humbled and warmed by people's active show of support to us. So whether donors are reaching out to us just to check in with us to see if we're okay, I think has been a beautiful outcome of what's obviously a challenging scenario for everyone. So we might close on that. And as I said, thank all three of you, Cliff, Adir and Adina, for your generosity of time and spirit this evening. We've peaked, I think, at about 120 attendees tonight, which is fabulous to kick off our JNF Connect series, and we really look forward to the next instalment, and be sure to look into your inboxes as we promote that next week. So thanks, guys, for joining us, and we wish everyone well, and Hag Sameach for Yom HaAtzmaut on Wednesday. Happy birthday, Israel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.